Welcome to the third seminar in our fall seminar series here at the Energy Systems Engineering in Lehigh University. My name is Rudy Shankar, and we have a very fascinating topic today, bats and wind energy, the green-green dilemma. And we're so fortunate to have an expert in this area, both on bats and wind energy, talk about the subject. And so it'll be presented by Don Solick, who's a senior technical lead at Electric Power Research Institute, EPRI. And I'll read a little bit of his bio before introducing him, him taking the floor. Don has been involved with bat research for nearly 30 years and has specialized in bat acoustic monitoring and bat wind energy issue for half of his career. At EPRI, he's a technical leader within the Protected Species Program and is involved with multiple cutting-edge projects focused on reducing impact to bats while increasing energy production by wind energy facilities. Donald frequently provides training for people to identify bat species from their echolocation calls, and he's currently writing 2 books on that subject. He also gives presentations on bats to schools and to the public. Now, for some housekeeping items, Don will be taking the floor, and he will talk for roughly an hour or so, and the Q&A would be following that. But he's also welcomed Q&A at a couple of key stopping points in his presentation. In the Q&A, I want to give preference to the students first before we ask the rest of the audience to be involved. Without further ado, let me introduce Don. Don, you're on.
All right. Thanks, Rudy and Susan, for setting this up, and for Andrew Coleman, who's on the call, for inviting me to talk with you all about bats and wind energy. Yeah, Rudy gave a good summary of my background. It's always weird to hear that sort of thing, but I will just mention that today I'm actually in New York, near Syracuse, starting a new field project out here. So I'm here in my hotel room, so please excuse the background. I'll be here for a few days, and then actually later this week I'll be driving right past Lehigh University on my way to Harrisburg, where I'll be doing a training, in-person training for the Pennsylvania Game Commission, teaching them how to do acoustic monitoring for bats. So it's nice to be out in this part of the world. Right now I'm usually from, I live in Colorado, so it's nice to get out. All right, I'm going to try and share a screen here, and we'll get this party started. All right. Looks like you can see that. My title screen. All right, perfect. Let me also just start my little stopwatch over here so I know how much time I'm babbling. Okay. All right, so welcome. We're going to talk about 2 things today. First, I want to spend like the first, I don't know, 20 minutes, a half hour talking about bats and what some of the things you should know about their ecology and their importance, which I think helps make the second part of the talk, which is bats and their impacts from wind energy. It will make it more meaningful, I think, if you understand why people even care about these animals. So, to start with, I want to start with this image here to help dispel a number of myths about bats. And so the first thing that people don't often know is that bats are mammals. You can see that right here we have a mom and her pup, and they both are, have a lot of plush fur on them. They look very huggable, very squeezable. I wouldn't do that, but they are mammals, not birds or any other taxa. So bats are mammals, and they also are not blind. That's another myth that's out there. Bats, they always say, "Oh, blind as a bat," but if you can see these two bats here, these are actually flying foxes. You wouldn't find these in Pennsylvania or anywhere on this side of the world unless you go to a zoo. But these bats here, they have very large eyes, which these bats use to find their food, which for these bats is fruit or flowers. So some bats have extremely good vision, like these flying foxes, but all bats can see just as well as you or I can, and they can see really well in dim light situations. So bats can see perfectly well. Um, Another thing to understand about bats is they, as shown here, like this mom has a single pup. And that's pretty normal. Most bats will only have one pup a year. So they're not like rodents or rabbits that can have like big litters of offspring each year. They're limited to basically one, maybe two offspring a year. And of those offspring that are born, only about 50% survive their first year. The first year for a bat can be extremely difficult. Um, and so because of that, because bats can only produce like one pup a year and only have really 50% replacement rate, it takes a long time for a bat population to recover if it has been impacted. All right. Speaking of timing in bats, that's another thing people don't often know is that um, bats can live much longer lives than you would expect for a small animal. Um, on average, most bats can live 20 to 30 years in the wild. And the record right now is for a little brown bat, which is a species found here in Pennsylvania. That has it was found living, yeah, it's 41 years after the day it was banded as a pup. So that bat itself, had lived at least 41 years on this planet. And that's pretty typical. And that's another thing that people don't really understand about these animals. You think they're small, so they probably don't live very long. But in fact, if they're left alone, then they can live quite a long time. And then over that period of time, they'll have one pup a year, and they can, um, yeah. So ecologically, you should probably think of them more in terms of like, elephants or top predators. These are animals that have very few offspring. They live long lives, and so that if you impact their populations, it can just take a long time for those populations to recover. All right. Last little bit I want to talk about just bats in general, and that is uh, these are the only mammals that can fly, and they do that using their hands. Which sounds weird, but if you hold out your left hand and compare it to the screen, up here at the top of the screen or top of the wing, is the bat's thumb. Along the edge of the wing here are the next two fingers. They're kind of hard to see, but it's the index and middle finger there. Here we have the ring finger, and this long digit here is the bat's pinky. All the skin that's between your fingers, that skin's it's been stretched really, really tight, and that's what the bats are flying on. They're basically flying with the power of jazz hands. And speaking of bats and hands, those are the hands holding this bat belong to my kid. Um, I mean, now they're 16, but back when they were like 4, they were already handling bats, which is great. All right, so we have flying mammals, flying long-lived mammals. That's what we should keep in mind here. All right. On this planet, at last count, there are approximately 1,498 bat species on the globe, and they're found everywhere except for the extreme polar regions or for very, very remote islands. Basically, anywhere you go on this planet, you're likely to encounter bats. So there's about 1,500 of them in this world, and they can kind of be divided into um, groups based on what they eat. And so about 220 species of bats on this planet, they are fruit eaters. They're going to be things like the flying foxes we just saw a minute ago that have very large eyes, very small ears. They're flying around at night using their vision mostly to look for fruit that is ripe that they can then consume. The fruit-eating bats of the world, they are incredibly important for seed dispersal. It's estimated that a single bat will consume 60,000 seeds in a single night. And bats have really quick throughput. So once a bat eats something, about 20 minutes later, it's pooping it out. And so these bats, they'll eat fruit at one tree, they'll digest the seeds, and about 20 minutes later, when they're flying to another tree, they'll start to poop out those seeds, which, because the seeds are embedded in bat guano, they're basically embedded in their own little nutrient-rich fertilizer packets. And yeah, these fruit-eating bats are important for dispersing the seeds for many tropical species of plants, but also for reforestation. So after you clear cut a forest in the Amazon, reforestation is largely going to be taking place mainly from bat guano. Okay, so that's about 220 species in the world are fruit-eating bats. On the other side of the screen here, we have the pollinators, which are about 180 species of bats on the planet. And the pollinating bats, they're just like our hummingbirds, our bees, our butterflies. They're doing a similar role. They are approaching flowers at night and stuffing their faces in those flowers and getting and they have long tongues which can go down and reach the base of the flower where all the nice sugar, water, nectar is, where they can get their nourishment. While they are feeding on a flower, the pollen from the anthers of that pollen of that flower will get in the bat's fur, and so then when that bat flies to another flower on another plant somewhere else, some of that pollen will fall off its fur and be transferred to the flower where that flower can then reproduce. So pollinating bats are really important for uh, well, being the sex vectors, I guess, for a lot of flowering plants in the tropics. It's estimated about 500 plants in the tropics that we know of depend exclusively on bats for pollination and for moving their gametes around. Now, a lot of those flowers and fruits in the tropics, you probably haven't heard of, but there is one thing that pollinating bats are responsible for, and that is they are the main pollinators for agave, which is it's a desert plant found mostly in Mexico. And from the agave, that's where we get tequila. So if you're a fan of tequila, next time you're having a margarita or something, you can raise a glass to bats, because if it weren't for bats, we would not have agave. If it were not for agave, we would not have tequila. So, all right. So we have the fruit-eating bats and the pollinating bats, but most of the rest of the bats on this planet, about 1,100 species, they are insect eaters. And their main role in the ecosystem and their main benefit for us is they are important for insect pest control, which we're going to dive into in a bit more detail here. Okay. So this bat here on the screen, by the way, he's a Western long-eared bat. You won't find these out in Pennsylvania, but he's munching on a moth there. And so in the US, we have 44 different bat species, and 41 of them will eat insects almost exclusively. The other three bats those are the pollinators that you might find down in southern Arizona, southern New Mexico, southern Texas. Okay. So how bats find insects is, I'm sure you all have heard of this before, but they use echolocation, um, which basically how it works is a bat flying along in the dark will make a sound like a chirp, and that chirp will go out into the night sky and it will bounce off things it runs into, whether they're buildings or trees, or in this case, insects. So that sound goes out. When it encounters resistance, an echo will come back from that object, and the bat, upon hearing those echoes, it will do some very quick calculus in its brain to know approximately how distant an object is, whether that object is moving, and in what direction that object is moving. And so with that sort of information, bats are then able to, you know, adjust their flight speed or their flight direction to come into contact with this insect that they might want to eat. And so when I give these talks to like kids groups, I ask them if, has anyone ever played Marco Polo? Uh, and when you're young. And with Marco Polo, that's a game where, you might be a bunch of kids like in a pool or something, and one of you is it. You close your eyes, and when you say Marco, then everyone else is supposed to say Polo. And you're using sound basically to try and localize where your friends are so you can go and tag them. And that's essentially what bats are doing with echolocation. They're basically playing a giant game of Marco Polo with the universe, and they're very good at it. So those returning echoes can tell the bat a lot about the things in its environment. And this will become more important a little later when we talk about wind turbines. But now I want to just show you echolocation in action, because that's always fun to do. And so here I'm gonna play a clip. Hopefully it plays and you can hear it. But before it starts, just so you know what this is a infrared video of a taken in a completely pitch black room. In the middle of the screen here, there's a moth hanging from a tether from the ceiling. And in the back, you're going to see a big brown bat approach this moth. You're going to hear it echolocating, and you're going to see how it localizes and catches this moth. But this has it's been slowed down so you can see it in better detail and hear it in better detail. So if I can figure out how to play it. Oh, here we go.
This is how a big brown bat attacks a non-clicking moth. You can see.
They come with a natural catcher's mitt.
Yeah, so there you go. That's echolocation in action. Now, this is not a bat. This is a moth. And when you start learning about bats and insects, people are always saying, oh, the bats are good for the mosquitoes. And they are. Bats are the only things out there flying around at night eating mosquitoes, so they are good for ridding us or for helping keeping those pest populations down, which in turn is good for human health. But actually, most bats are probably going out and they're targeting beetles and moths. Bats especially love moths. Now, moths don't like to be eaten. And so over the millennia, many moths have actually developed organs that are sensitive to bat echolocation. They're actually tympanate membranes. You can't see it in this picture right now, but they'd be tympanate membranes on the thorax of this moth, probably somewhere under its wing. And those membranes, when they detect high-pitched sound, like what a bat makes when it's echolocating, it will tell the moth, uh-oh, trouble's nearby, you should take evasive action. And so often these moths, when they hear an echolocating bat, they'll tuck their wings and drop to the ground. Now, I say this just to show you another fun video, really, because some bats have come up with ways to get around this dropping mechanism. And here's an example of that happening.
The little red bat that we've videotaped makes a basket with its tail membrane right under the dropping insect. And so by coming in and doing this little circus flip, he defeats the dropping mechanism.
See, so yeah, hopefully you're appreciating. I love showing that video to people, especially kids. They're like, "Oh my gosh!" Because yeah, you literally have a bat. When these bats to get around this dropping mechanism by the moths, they'll come up at a underneath the moth at a certain angle so that they can then do this flip, catch them in their tail membrane, and catch them as they're dropping. So yeah, you might call them acrobats. All right. So to kind of really illustrate how bats contribute to insect pest control in the US, I want to use this species, which is called the Mexican free-tailed bat. It's called a Mexican free-tailed bat because there's this little free tail hanging down from its tail membrane. Um, this is this is actually the fastest animal on the planet. They just discovered this a few years ago. It's no longer the cheetah. The Mexican free-tailed bat has been clocked flying straight line flight at 100 miles per hour. So this is a very fast, fast individual type of bat. This is also one of the most abundant bats on the planet. If anybody here has ever been to Congress Avenue Bridge in Texas, in Austin, Texas, that's where you can see like 2 million of these guys exiting a bridge in that downtown area every single night. They also form enormous colonies at Carlsbad Caverns in New Mexico and lots of other places throughout the southeast and southwest of the U.S. The largest colony of bats on the planet is in a place called Bracken Cave in Texas, where you'll have 20 million of these individual bats living. And all of those bats, the 20 million bats, those are all moms and their pups. So it's just a gigantic maternity ward of bats, which I had the pleasure of visiting a few summers ago. And so here's a slow motion video of bats emerging from, here's the cave down here, and I'll go and play it. This is all slow motion video. But here we got bats coming out of this cave, and they're actually forming like a little bat NATO here in the middle before attaining really high altitude, at which point they will then fly off into the distance in kind of a giant river of bats. And that river will stretch for, dozens and dozens of miles across the landscape where bats are looking for insects to feed on. So if you ever get a chance to see this, it's a pretty impressive sight. And so each of these Mexican free-tailed bats, when they go out every single night to forage, they're consuming half of their body weight in food, which I think is pretty impressive. I mean, these bats, they only weigh about 10 grams. About half of that is 5 grams, which is about the weight of a nickel. So each of these bats is going out and consuming a nickel's worth of insects each night, which may not sound that impressive, but when you have 20 million bats doing that every single night, that adds up. In fact, I've done the math, and 20 million bats eating a nickel's worth of insects each night means that they are consuming roughly 22 tons of, or 22 elephants worth of insects every single night that they're out there foraging on the landscape. Which I think is a pretty impressive amount of food. And because they're eating so much insects, they produce large piles of guano in their cave. These are, two biologists standing next to a large pile of bat guano from that same cave in Texas. All right. So now hopefully you're getting a better sense as to oh wait, no, I want to spend a little more time on this insect pest control, just to put this all in a much greater context. So here we got a map of the U.S., and this is just farmland in the U.S. Darker green areas, there's more farmland. And this yellow star here is showing where that cave, that Bracken Cave that we just saw a video of, that's where this cave is in Texas, roughly, basically south central Texas. And a number of years ago, a guy named Cleveland and others, they wanted to calculate the economic importance of the bats of this cave to cotton farmers in that region. So that part of Texas, it's like a 6-county region where the primary crop is cotton. And if you're a cotton farmer, your biggest nemesis is something called the cotton boll weevil, which it's actually a moth, but the larval form, the caterpillar of that moth, will just decimate cotton crops. And so since we know bats like to eat moths, and there's a large number of bats in this 6-county area, Cleveland and others wanted to figure out just how much they might be saving the cotton farmers with by killing their crop pests each year. And they for that 6 county region, they found out that that one colony of bats was saving cotton farmers about $750,000 a year in avoided crop damage. So without bats in the system, those farmers would have been losing a lot more of their crops to cotton boll weevil. Now that's one colony of bats feeding on one insect pest in one part of the US. A few years after this study, Justin Boyles and others, they decided to apply this across the US to see how all bats might contribute to, well, to American agriculture. And the number they came up with was bats are basically saving American farmers $23 trillion a year in avoided crop pest damage. So, which I think is a pretty significant number. And this is just agriculture. I mean, there's timber pests out there too. There's various moths and beetles that will decimate our forests. And bats are also the only nighttime predator of those insects. So bats are taking care of the agricultural pests, the timber pests, and also the health pests like the mosquitoes. All right. So hopefully that's giving you a better appreciation for bats. I mean, I personally think they're cute and amazing just on their own, but they're providing some services for us. Okay. Now, before we get into the second part of this talk, so this is what Pennsylvania and a lot of the US looks like for several months of the year. We're quickly coming to this part of the year. And during this time of the year, there aren't any insects flying around. And so what do our bats do? How do bats that feed on insects survive winters when we don't have insects flying around? There are two strategies that bats use, and these will play into the rest of my talk today. We'll get there soon. One strategy that bats will do is they will hibernate. So this is a tricolored bat, which is a species that is pending. It might be listed as endangered in the near future. Well, I'll say this. In the last administration, this bat was petitioned to be endangered. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service said, yes, it should be endangered. And they were getting to the point of officially announcing it as endangered, but then another administration took over. And so this has become less of a priority. But this tricolor bat is probably going to be listed as endangered in the near future. What this bat and a number of other species in the U.S. do for the winter is they'll find a nice, cool, quiet cave where they will hibernate. And when a bat hibernates, what it's doing is it's lowering its body temperature so that it's similar to the ambient temperature of its surroundings. And by lowering your body temperature, you slow down all of your body functions, like metabolism and like your heart. So normally a flying bat, its heart is beating 100 times a minute, but the heart of a hibernating bat, it's only beating probably once, every, so its heart is only beating like once every 10 seconds or so, which is pretty impressive, I think, first of all. But secondly, what that does is by slowing all your body temperature, your body processes down, is you're using a lot less energy. So like this bat too, its respiratory rate is really slow. It's going to take one breath every 90 minutes or so. So if it had taken a breath at the start of this webinar, it wouldn't take another breath till the end of this webinar. And so by doing this, these small animals can save tons and tons of energy so that this bat would not need to eat at all for the entire winter. So, the way I tell kids this is picture that you eat a dinner on Halloween and then you don't eat again until Easter. That's how a hibernating bat will survive the winter. But um, we have a problem with hibernating bats in this country, and that problem is called white nose syndrome, which this bat actually has. You can see kind of the white dusting on its nose and on the tips of its forearms here. Um, this white nose syndrome is caused by a fungus called Pseudogymnoascus destructans, but we're just going to call it white nose syndrome because that's a lot easier to say. But this white nose syndrome, this is it's decimating our bat populations in the U.S. and in Canada as well. And so what happened is this X marks a spot where back in 2006, nearly 20 years ago now, this fungus was introduced to upstate New York by cavers who probably brought it over on their shoes from Europe. Okay, so this fungus actually occurs naturally in Europe. Doesn't seem to be a problem for the bats there, but here it's become a very big problem. Because what happens is when a bat is remaining motionless for several months of the year, things grow on it, which usually is not a big deal. But this fungus, for whatever reason, when it grows on these bats, it irritates them to the point that they will wake themselves up to groom it off, you know? They're basically trying to get rid of an annoying itch. And every time that a bat wakes up, it ends up burning a lot of its energy stores to get back to a higher body temperature. And the issue there is that if a bat wakes itself up too many times during the winter, it's going to burn through all of its energy stores. And so what happens with these white nose infected bats is around February, around Valentine's Day, to stay with our holiday motif, around Valentine's Day, these bats will emerge from their caves starving. They're looking for food to eat. And of course, it's February and there's no insects flying around, and so these bats actually die of starvation. That's the ultimate cause. So white nose syndrome is the proximate cause of death. Starvation is the ultimate cause of death. And what this map is showing is how white nose is spread across the US and Canada over the last 20 years. Basically, it expanded its range probably 200 miles a year to the point where now it's just showing up in some of the western states. Nevada is the only place that it hasn't reached yet, but I'm sure it'll get there, you know, pretty soon. But it's just sort of showing up in these western states, whereas in the east it's already been established for nearly 2 decades. And that's been a problem because the colonies that this fungus has gotten into, it's basically decimated colonies by 99%. So it has just annihilated a number of our eastern bat species to the point where, I mean, some of them were already listed as endangered, but now the northern long-eared bat has been added as endangered species. The tricolored bat I mentioned is about to become an endangered species, and the little brown bat, which used to be one of the most ubiquitous common bats in the U.S. It's extremely rare now in the eastern U.S. to find a little brown bat because they've been annihilated by this fungus. And so this has been a major regulatory issue. It's what has it's put bats on people's radar a lot more than they used to be. And this is a problem for us because actually recent research from New York found this link between these declining bat populations due to white nose syndrome and an increase in infant mortality. And what they've been finding, these two graphs kind of show it. This top graph is showing insecticide use in terms of the years relative to white nose syndrome detection. And so basically the dashed line is showing when white nose syndrome showed up in the counties that they were doing a study in. And prior to white nose showing up, insecticide use was pretty low, and infant mortality rate was also fairly low. And then as white nose took hold and we lost a lot of our bats, so farmers were using a lot more insecticide, over the next several years. And what was found is that infant mortality was also rising during the same period of time. And so what this paper was showing or attempting to show is that as bats are declining due to white nose syndrome, farmers are using more pesticides, and that appears to have resulted in more infant deaths. the economists also ran some numbers on this and found out that in the white nose syndrome affected counties, it's basically costing American farmers $40 billion more a year in terms of pesticide use and that sort of thing. So, yeah. So that's white nose syndrome, and that's a major issue right now. And that's related to their hibernating strategy for the winter. So a lot of bats are hibernating during the winter, but other bats are migrating to warmer areas. So if we're here in central Pennsylvania, around this time of year, we've got at least 3 species: the hoary bat, the eastern red bat, and the silver-haired bat. Around this time of year, they're migrating further south to areas where it's warm year-round, where you can have insects year-round, and then they'll spend their summers foraging and eating down there, and then they will make their way back up to Pennsylvania, where they'll resume eating insects here. I think I said that wrong. They're not spending their summers there; they're spending the winters there. I'm sure for them it feels like an everlasting summer, but it's they're spending the winters down south and coming back in the summers, and that's great. Except this is where wind energy becomes an issue. Because what we're finding is that especially right now, during the fall migration, this is when a lot of bats are dying at wind farms. Basically, every wind farm you see kills bats. Some are killing a lot fewer than others, but some are estimated to be killing thousands of bats a year. And so in 2013, they tried to run some numbers on this, and they estimated that back then there was about approximately 200,000 to 900,000 bats are being killed at wind turbines in the US. Now, of course, we're 12 years later. Wind energy has doubled on the landscape, and so fatalities for bats are probably a lot higher. There are at least 2 million bats are being killed per year due to wind turbines. But we won't know the true number. But this is an issue, and basically recent research, this lower paper here by Frick and others, they've basically calculated that if fatalities for these bats continue at the rate that it has, that at least one of those migratory species, the hoary bat, may go extinct in the next 20 to 30 years, unless we do things to slow their or to reduce their rate of collision with these wind turbines. And so basically, that kind of concludes my bat section. And what the picture I want to paint for you here is that right now in the US, between our hibernating species getting annihilated by a fungal disease, and our migratory species being killed in large numbers by wind turbines, it's a really bad time to be a bat right now in the US. So I'm going to stop right there and just see if there's any questions about bats before we get into the wind side of things.
Well, Don, there's a question from Joe. What is the frequency range of the bat sonar?
Yeah, so bat echolocation, it can range between like as low as 8 kilohertz to as high as 200 kilohertz. And so our human hearing is only up to about 16 kilohertz. And I'm sure mine is a lot less than that now after being old and listening to a lot of heavy metal. But yeah, so some bats we can actually hear echolocating because they're still within our range of hearing, but most are probably echolocating between 20 kilohertz and 50 kilohertz is where most of them probably do most of their hunting. Any other questions?
Yeah, Joe has a follow-up. How does the bite rate of rabies from bats compare to other animals?
Wait, sorry, one more time?
How does a bite rate of rabies, bite rate of bite of bite so
Yeah.
bite of a rabies bat, I guess. How does it compare to other animals?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure about bite rate. I do know that, okay, so I mean, this question is getting at, some bats are rabid. It turns out that it's really a very small proportion of all bats. It's like they estimated less than 0.5% of all bats carry rabies. The issue, though, is that when people encounter bats, they're usually encountering like a sick bat on the ground that they go and pick up, and then that bat might bite you, and then you'll get rabies. So the yeah, very few bats actually carry rabies, but the statistics have kind of been inflated by health numbers because yeah, most bats that are reported for testing end up being rabid because those are the ones that people find and submit. So how it compares to other species, I couldn't really say offhand. I do know that yeah, I mean, skunks and foxes and dogs and other animals carry rabies and are probably more of a threat to humans from rabies transmission than bats. As long they don't attack you. They're not like Old Yeller where they froth at the mouth and fly into you and latch onto your neck or something. No, sick bats will leave you alone unless you go and pick them up, and then that's when the problems happen.
Question from Michael Smith in the chat box. Do bats contribute to controlling the lanternfly invasion in Pennsylvania?
We're looking into that. I'm sad. I don't think so. I know some people have looked into that. I think there's at least a few papers. Yeah, this is kind of a new area of research. And I don't think so because those lanternflies are more diurnal. And so it's really a matter of, yeah, if the lanternflies were flying in the dusk or at night, then yeah, that'd be fair game for bats, and I'm sure they would be taking them on. And I know some people are starting to look at that to see, are they showing up in the diets of bats? Because that would be fantastic. But right now, I don't. My guess is they're just not flying at the right times of day to be eaten by bats.
Last question in the chat box from Ryan Paxad. How much do bats contribute to pest control and ecology relative to other animals that fill a similar ecological niche? Good.
Whew. I mean, that's a huge question, and I guess the short answer to that is that no other animals are filling that niche. So like, there's nothing else flying around at night eating large amounts of insects, for example. I mean, at dusk you'll get swallows and other nightjars that will eat insects, and I don't think anyone's ever quantified their impact. But then, they're only feeding at dusk and dawn. Whereas bats they're active all night long if they want to be, and feeding on insects that are active all night long. So I'd say that, yeah, without bats in the ecosystem, we'd have a lot more insects on the landscape at night, which is great for insects, but it might not be so great for our crops and our timber and our health.
Gary asks, any natural predators?
No, they're not. Yeah, in the entire planet, okay. In the Saharan desert, there might be a particular falcon that feeds, primarily on bats, but that's it. They're not, like rabbits and mice. Everything's gunning for them, and many predators have become specialized for feeding on, rabbits and mice and other things. Nothing is really specialized for feeding on bats. That said, if an animal can catch a bat, it will eat it. I mean, I'm sure like domestic cats probably eat a large number of bats. There's places where, especially like that Bracken Cave that I showed you, when the animals on the landscape learn about a source of food like that, they'll show up. So if you go to Bracken Cave at dusk, you'll see a whole bunch of birds of prey showing up, various, kestrels and falcons and hawks. And so they hang out to pick off bats as they're coming out of that cave. Skunks and other things will be wandering around the ground for any bats that get like, that fall to the ground, that they'll be there to jump on them. But it's those more specialized situations that you'll have things gunning for bats. And I'll stop there. I could talk a lot more about that, but All
right, I guess the final question you probably answer later. Are there mitigation methods to prevent bad deaths from wind turbines? Stay tuned.
That's a good segue. Let's get to that. So, first thing I'm going to show you here is an example of why wind turbines are an issue for bats. So in this video, this is infrared video taken from West Virginia back in 2005. This yellow circle is going to show you where the bat's going to show up here. And so let's just see what happens. So there's the bat flying around, and there's the wind turbine spinning, and the bat just seems to be enjoying flying around these blades. It drops back out of sight and then comes back in. And anyway, so that bat, as far as we know, survived that encounter with a wind turbine. But they're not all so lucky. So here's another video where we have the bat coming from behind, and then bam. I'll play it again because it happens pretty quick. But here's the bat, and there it goes. Yeah, so that's what's happening. These bats are they're colliding with the moving turbine blades. You know, it's not like birds running into a stationary window or anything. Bats typically don't run into stationary things, mainly because their sonar really helps them know where things are at. But with moving turbine blades, that seems to be an issue for them. And so, why? Well, after 20 years or so of studying this, we still don't know. We have some theories. One of the better theories has come up from scientists from Bat Conservation International, something that they're calling the sequential attraction hypothesis. And that is that bats flying across the landscape, especially these migratory bats, as they're flying across the landscape, they might be attracted to wind facilities from a distance, maybe because of the lights, or maybe because the wakes created by these turbines are similar to the airflow they might see near tall trees. These bats that are getting killed at turbines, they mainly roost in tall trees. So maybe the turbines are being confused as a structure they could approach and look for a roost on. We don't know. So bats might be being attracted to wind farms from a great distance. And then as they get closer, maybe they're foraging on insects that are also attracted to the turbines. Maybe they're inspecting the turbine as a place to roost. Or maybe it's just that their echolocation is incompatible with spinning blades. So, for example, these insect-eating bats, their echolocation, which is an amazing sense that they have, it's evolved for two reasons. One is to avoid running into stationary objects when you're flying at high rates of speed in the dark. And the other reason is to try and catch small flying insects. And so they're really good at avoiding large stationary things and catching small flying things. But when you have a turbine blade, which is moving, 70 miles per hour, like the bat knows it's there. It can see it. It can ping off of it, but it may not know that it's moving at such a rate, and it may not even know it's moving, honestly. And so when the bat tries to juke the blade by going above or below it, that's when bad things happen. So that's one theory. Another theory could just be turbulence. The bats are coming close to these blades, and then the turbulence from the wind kind of goofs with their ability to fly, and then they get whacked. So, the patterns that we've learned about bat fatality is they're only colliding with moving blades. Okay, the bats are not moving into stationary. They're not running into stationary turbines or stationary blades. It has to do with movement. The main bats killed are those long distance migrants, the hoary, the eastern red, and the silver-haired bat that I showed you pictures of. Those are all tree roosting bats as well. So these tree roosting long distance migrants are the ones that are really getting killed in large numbers. Mostly fatalities are occurring during fall migration. So right now, there's actually many, many bats being killed at night at wind turbines. And they're mostly occurring on nights with low wind speeds. So we're talking like less than 6 meters per second. And so using that information, we can then get to, we can then try and figure out some ways to mitigate that fatality. And so probably the most effective way to reduce bat fatality is something called blanket curtailment, or I'm going to call it wind speed based blanket curtailment. And so curtailment, I mean, what that is, basically you're raising the cut-in speed at which the blades are rotating and electricity is generated. So I think typically the cut-in speed for most turbines is 3 meters per second. But you can raise that cut-in speed to 4 meters per second, 5 meters per second, 6 meters per second, and so on. That just means that the turbine really won't start spinning until wind speeds are at those high velocities. And since we know that most bats are killed on low wind speed nights, we can potentially raise the cut-in speed so that the blades aren't spinning at speeds at which bats are usually killed at. So the advantage of basically feathering turbines or curtailing them or shutting them off at higher wind speeds is it reduces bat fatality by 33% for every 1 meter per second increase in cut-in speed. That's based on a paper by Michael Whitby and others a few years ago. So yeah, if you raise your cut-in speed from 3 to 4 meters per second, you're going to be reducing bat fatality by 33%. If you raise it from 3 to 5 meters per second, you should be reducing bat fatality by 66%, and so on. So this is an effective way to reduce bat fatalities. The disadvantage, of course, is that the blades aren't spinning. You're not producing electricity. And so that same paper that documented this advantage also noted that the annual energy production loss for these wind facilities that were doing this wind speed-based blanket curtailment were between 0.06 and 3.2% annual energy production loss, which to me doesn't seem like much, but the impression I get from wind energy companies is they every bit, yeah, they don't want to lose anything. I think they're already on a fairly tight margin. And so we have blanket curtailment that you can do. It's effective, but wind companies don't generally like it. So we've tried to move towards what we're calling smart curtailment. And this is curtailment that will only shut off turbines when we think bats are likely to be present or when we know that they are present. And so it's selectively deactivating turbines for shorter periods of time. And so one type of smart curtailment is something called model-based curtailment. There's an example of this called Echo Pitch, which has been developed by Stantec consulting group. And what they do is they go to a wind farm and they put out acoustic detectors and they try to get a sense as to the weather conditions at which, when are bats most active? At these wind speeds, on nights with or without precipitation, what's the barometric pressure? Anyway, all these things go into these models, which after they've studied a specific wind farm for a few years, they can then apply those. Sorry, I'm hearing very loud noises in my hotel. We're okay. But yeah, they'll apply these models that will only shut off the turbines under those specific weather conditions. So it has to be nighttime, has to be fall, has to be, less than so many meters per second of wind velocity, that sort of thing. So that's being developed. It so far has been untested. Then there's detection-based curtailment. And there's a few examples of this. One is called timer, which is kind of being shown here in this graphic on the left. There's another one called EchoSense, which is developed by Natural Power. And this is, in this case, you've got a bat detector and an acoustic monitor on top of the turbine that is recording high frequency sounds like bat echolocation. And so if this detector detects a bat, it'll send a signal to the SCADA system, and it'll determine whether certain weather conditions are being met at that time. If it's a low wind speed night in the fall, for example, then SCADA will turn off the turbines at the wind farm for like a half hour, and then they'll evaluate again. If no other bats have been detected, then they'll resume operation. But if more bats are still being detected, then they'll keep the turbines off. Um, and so, yeah, this has been studied. A paper in 2019 was done at a site in Wisconsin called Blue Sky Greenfield, and there they determined that the turbines using this approach were only deactivated like 48% of the time, and bat fatalities were reduced by 83%. So, this was a way to reduce bat fatalities, keep them, avoid killing a lot of bats, but you're able to harness a lot more energy from this sort of approach. Okay. But then there's other ways to potentially deter bats, and one of them is ultrasonic deterrence. And so an ultrasonic deterrent, what this is, and there's a bad picture of one here that might be found on a nacelle of a turbine. What these are, they're basically like ultrasonic white noise generators that presumably make, noise that bats would hear and then be deterred by, because that might interfere with their radar systems. It might jam them a bit. And so the advantage of an ultrasonic deterrent is if you put these on a turbine and bats are actually repelled by them, then you don't need to turn off your turbines. You can continue generating electricity, reduce bat mortality, and it's a win-win. It'd be a wonderful solution, which is why there's been a lot of money pumped into trying to find this magical ultrasonic deterrent. So yeah, the advantages are there's no reduction in energy production. We can't hear these deterrents, so we wouldn't even know that they exist. So yeah, those are some advantages. The disadvantages are, of course, this has been tested at several facilities in the US, and really they found mixed success. In some places, they found that they do seem to work and deter some species, but in other places, they actually seem to be attracting species. Maybe some bats are just, they're curious about this sound, and so they come closer, and then they get. Oh, we got someone drawing on the screen. That's cool. I don't know where that came from. That's not me. Anyway, so yeah, so there are some the main disadvantages, we're not sure how effective they are. Another disadvantage is physics. So ultrasound does not travel very far through the air. The signals weaken very quickly. And so bats may not actually hear this deterrent until they're already within the rotor swept zone. So, how effective is a deterrent if you don't get deterred until you're already within the danger area? And then, of course, turbines are getting bigger. So the diameter of the rotor swept area is getting bigger. But yeah, you can't really amplify ultrasound. So that's an issue. Lastly, it also would require multiple deterrents per turbine. So you probably would want a bunch on the tower and several on the nacelle. And they're not going to be cheap. So if you're basically hanging ornaments on all these turbines like they're Christmas trees, that's gonna eventually eat up a lot of your profit. So those are ultrasonic deterrents. There's also potentially a ultraviolet light deterrent. And the way this would work, and they've tested it at the NREL wind facility in Colorado, is you put a ring of these ultrasonic lights around the tower, circumference basically, and those would shine upward at night, basically illuminating the nacelle, the as much of the rotor zone as you can and part of the tower. And so really, this isn't so much a deterrent as in, oh, it irritates the bats or anything. No, they won't care. But bats can see ultraviolet light. And so if they can see from a distance that a turbine that's lit up by ultraviolet light is not a tree, then maybe they won't come closer to investigate it. That's the theory. And so if this works, this would be fantastic because you could put these on turbines, light them up at night. You would have no reduction in energy production, just like the ultrasonic deterrents. Ultraviolet light is invisible to humans, so we won't know that these things are lit up. And bats can see them from a long distance, so then they don't even approach those moving blades. The disadvantage of this is it hasn't really been rigorously tested. As I mentioned, they did do this for 2 years at the NREL site in Colorado, but they did it on 2 turbines, and at the end of 2 years, they weren't able to really say anything, and that's because in that part of Colorado, they just have very, very low bat activity. Like they're only recording like 1 or 2 bats a night anyway. So to be able to show that you deterred bats with such low activity anyway, yeah, it was very unsatisfying. And so actually, EPRI, we put in we were awarded by the Department of Energy a $2 million contract to do a more rigorous test of this at a facility in Michigan. And we had it all lined up. We had our facility figured out. We had our study figured out. We were all ready to go into the field this June. But that, again, is when the current administration has kind of changed our work schedule. I mean, basically right now we're on a what do I call it? Anyway, nothing's moving right now, like because of the uncertainty in the administrative environment. Because our project has to do with wind, there's a good chance that this money, even though we applied for it and won it, they might decide to yank it because it's no longer considered a priority, which is unfortunate. Because at this facility that we're going to do this study, we were also going to use 3D thermal cameras. And we're going to use those. We're going to use those. And we're going to use ultrasonic detectors on the turbine itself to kind of evaluate bat activity. Basically, when the lights are on, was there less activity than when the lights were off? And we were pretty excited to do this because we had at EPRI we've developed this 3D monitoring system where you take 2 thermal cameras, you set them about 20 meters apart at the base of a turbine, and it can create an overlapping field of view. So then later you can use those 2 video feeds to construct a 3D image of object passing through them. And then we also have developed an algorithm that can identify and track targets in 3D space and basically determine, are these birds, are these bats, are these insects? And so we were really excited to put out a bunch of these 3D cameras at a wind facility. And we would be using them to evaluate the ultraviolet light deterrent, but we'd also be just getting a lot of data on how these bats are interacting with these turbines in 3D, very precise 3D. So we'd also would have put on I can't speak, ultrasonic detectors on the nacelle to help us identify any species that we actually saw on the video. And this is sort of data that we would have gotten from it. Which now since there's these other red marks on the screen, it's a little harder to see this. I don't know where those came from, and I don't know how to clean them off. So we'll ignore the other red marks. But what we got here, we got 5 different examples. So we have used these cameras, these 3D cameras, at a site in Iowa, where we did observe a number of bat encounters with turbines. And so this first one here is actually showing a fatality event. We'll talk more about that in a second. Let me get rid of this bar here. Here we've got this red zigzag line as a bat, inspecting the monopole of that turbine. Here one is inspecting the nacelle. Here one came and inspected the blade. It's kind of hard to see it with these other red marks. And then here we have a social interaction. So the red line and the blue line are two different bats, and they kind of came together around this this active turbine, and we're flying around it. So you can get, some really good data on bat interactions with turbines. So the fatality event from that other study, we now have potential evidence of turbulence being one of the issues affecting bat flight. And so with these, they had 3 fatalities. Well, actually, no, sorry. They had 2 fatality events recorded on these 3D cameras. And the first 2 are being shown from a side profile. And this third one's showing this middle interaction from the top. And basically what we're finding here is that the bats are flying pretty straight line flight. And then when they get within 5 to 10 meters of the rotor swept zone, their flight gets very erratic. And so that could be a sign of these bats basically losing control because of the turbulence generated by these blades. And then that's why they are ultimately hit sometimes is, because they can't avoid the object. So anyway, that's some pretty exciting research that's been coming from these 3D cameras. It would have been nice to get more out on the landscape to get more of this information, but there you go. All right, I think it's my final slide here, and then we can talk more about this. So challenges. We have a few of these. So one, I already mentioned this earlier. So first of all, turbines are becoming more efficient. And so now they're able to generate energy at low wind speeds. Now, that's a problem for bats because if most bats are dying at low wind speeds, but turbines are more efficient now, and we're able to capture more energy at low wind speeds, then developers are going to be less interested in shutting the turbines off on low wind speeds and losing that valuable energy. So yeah, curtailment becomes less desirable as these turbines are getting more efficient. Turbines are also getting much larger, and so the area of risk is getting larger. As I mentioned, like the ultrasonic deterrents, if we were to put those on a nacelle, nowadays bats might be able to hear that ultrasonic white noise outside the rotor swept zone, but as these rotor diameters are getting bigger and bigger, the bats are going to be able to hear the deterrents until they're already within the zone of risk. So so that applies to the ultrasonic deterrents, but also that smart curtailment system that's detecting bats and shutting off turbines when they hear bats. If the bats don't get detected until they're already within the rotor swept zone, then it's less effective to shut the turbines off after they've already been detected. So those are 2 issues. And then, of course, we have offshore wind, which may or may not. Offshore wind was becoming a big topic, and we were starting to invest a lot of time and energy into it. Right now, it's kind of a big question mark where offshore wind in the U.S. is going to go. But it's much trickier to monitor bat fatalities offshore. We do know that bats occur offshore, and again in the fall. When bats are being killed on land, that's when they're also found offshore. So it's likely that offshore wind turbines will kill bats as well, but it'll be harder to quantify those impacts. And so, so here we have this green-green dilemma. On one hand, we've got bats, which are extremely beneficial to us, to the environment, especially in the US, mainly due to their insect pest control, but elsewhere in the world for seed dispersal and for pollination. So we got, we can hopefully see the value of protecting bats so they can continue to do good things for us. But then we also have renewable energy, which, is a better form of energy than fossil fuels for, as far as climate change is concerned. And other pollutants. But yeah, we still have these renewable wind energy machines, unfortunately, killing bats that are important for our ecosystem. So that is the dilemma that we face. And I think, that's all I got. So
Oh, yes, terrific.
ready for questions.
Terrific. Uh, Very engrossing. Okay, so if you want, you can stop sharing and see. As I said at the beginning, I'm going to open the floor for questions from students. Students, please unmute yourself and introduce yourself and ask the question, please.
Yeah, don't unmute. Yeah, because I think just talk.
My name is Panache. My question is, we talked about how beds are killed by the wind turbines. I wanted to ask how much of a factor does barotrauma contribute to the death of these kids?
Right, yeah, barotrauma. Yeah, I'm glad you're asking that. Actually, a very good friend of mine was on the paper that kind of established barotrauma as a potential cause of bat deaths of wind turbines. And so for what they were finding is they were finding bats on the ground that didn't have any obvious physical injuries, but then when they would necropsy them, they would find internal hemorrhaging, or what they thought was internal hemorrhaging. And so what they were thinking is that, you know, the turbines as they're spinning, they're creating such changes in air pressure that the bats are basically getting the bends, and that was so that was a hot topic about 15 years ago. And what we've learned since, though, is because several other folks have gone out and studied this, particularly like veterinary pathologists. They've recovered dead bats from wind farms, and they've looked at their injuries, and they found out that actually no, what was being thought of as hemorrhaging due to barotrauma, it's blunt force impact, it's blunt force trauma. And so also some modeling at NREL a number of years ago, a very brilliant kid basically did some very very impressive modeling, which I can't really regurgitate here. But they found that given what we know about bats, their size and their flight speed, and what we know about wind turbines and air pressure differences around their blades, that it would be extremely, extremely rare for enough pressure difference to be generated for barotrauma to actually occur. So right now, people aren't so much subscribed to barotrauma as a cause of deaths. It's blunt force, it's collisions for the most part.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I have a question.
Questions from the audience? I'm
So,
sorry, students?
Yeah, we have a question here. Good morning. My name is Bentusila. I am an ESE student. So first of all, I wanted to thank you for your presentation. It was very interesting and holistic. But I have a question with the collision between bats and the wind turbines. You showed that it can have an impact on the bats. They can literally die. But can the wind blades be affected by multiple collision with bats?
Not that I'm aware of. I've never heard of, mainly because these bats are, they're very small. We're talking, 10-gram little balls of fluff. So yeah, I've never heard of any instance of damage from bats or even from eagles. I don't know. Maybe you know more than I do in that sense, but I don't think I've heard of anything damaging a wind turbine blade from collision. I will say, kind of on that same topic, some folks are looking into ways to detect collisions by having, I forget what they call them. Well, I'm going to call them bump detectors, where inside the blade they've got some sensors that can sense like vibrations, like really strong vibrations. And I think those are used for other aspects of the turbine, but it was thought that maybe they can register when something large hits it, at a sufficient rate of speed. Like if you get a big bonk, maybe that's an indicator that something's run into your blade. So they're looking into that as a way to maybe do a better job of monitoring fatality of bats and birds, especially offshore where we can't really, observe them that well, can't pick dead things up off the ground. But yeah, that's what your question calls to mind. I hope that helped.
Also, I have another question.
Sure.
Excuse me. Do we see some patterns of coping mechanism in bats? Is it possible they can adapt to wind turbines?
That's a great question, and we haven't so far. Although, I mean, if you study fatalities at a single wind farm for several years in a row, the fatalities do seem to decrease. But we don't know if that's because there's just fewer animals to kill still, or if there's some sort of learning. The problem with wind turbines is you get hit by a blade, chances are you're not surviving. So you can't really learn from that. It would take, more glancing blows or things that didn't completely annihilate you on impact for you to be able to learn and adjust your behavior accordingly. So yeah, I don't think learning will be helpful in the long run, unfortunately.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Students, questions
Yes,
for Jan?
yes, I have a question. Hello, my name is Yunus Kadzim. I'm also an ESE student. I wanted to ask how much has siting for new wind plants improved? Are we not taking into consideration maybe routes that beds take when they are migrating? Is that something we're considering as we work on building new wind farms?
Yeah, for like siting the wind farms, is that what
Yes.
Yeah. I'll say that not much has been, well, yeah. In general, siting doesn't seem to help alleviate bat deaths that we've found so far. I mean, there's been a lot of interest in it. But unless you're in a situation where where you have a wind farm near a cave where there's a known large colony of bats, like those situations, well, yeah, you can attempt to site things better or to do something so that you can monitor. So like in Nevada there's a wind farm in northeast Nevada near Rose Guano Cave, where they got a large population of bats coming out, like just a few kilometers from where the wind farm is located. And what they learned is if they put laser detection systems over the entrance and exit of that cave and tie that to the SCADA system, they can, they'll know when the bats are coming out in large numbers. And during that period of time, they'll shut off the turbines while the bats are flying through, and then they'll resume operation once there's fewer bats entering and exiting that cave, and that's reduced bat fatality there. So that'd be an instance of siting for a wind farm that they still probably shouldn't have put the wind farm there. It's probably a bad site for it, but at least once they've figured that out, they've made some adjustments. But yeah, just in general. Yeah, like I said, all wind facilities are killing bats, and there doesn't seem to be any single driver of that. At first, we thought, oh, it's the wind turbines that are on these Appalachian ridge tops. Those are the big killers. But then we started having facilities in the middle of cornfields in Iowa also killing lots of bats. So yeah, unfortunately, with bats and wind farms, there's not much siting you can really do other than maybe knowing about if you've got large concentrations of a bat, maybe that's not a wise place to develop. I hope that answered your question, Eunice.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions from students? Going once?
Oh, I
Selena?
see Selena.
Hi, I'm Selena. I was wondering what's prioritized versus the white nose and wind turbines in the bat community.
What's prioritized? Yeah. They're both pretty well, yeah. There's a lot of research money for both. Which is hilarious. When I got started in my career, neither of those things was an issue, and it was all about bats and forests and sustainable silviculture, that sort of thing. Now there's a lot of money being poured into trying to figure out ways to, or a lot of money right now is in just like looking for a vaccine or something you can apply to yeah, keep bats alive that are impacted by white nose. But then a lot of other money's going into ways to studies at wind farms. The issue, I'm glad you brought this up. One of the issues is that those same bats that are being annihilated by white nose syndrome, they aren't really killed in large numbers at wind farms, but because those are becoming endangered, now suddenly that's a big issue for wind farms. There's a big regulatory issue, because we know that wind farms in general don't kill many of those hibernating species, but if they do, that's bad news. You're breaking some government laws there, and so that's where they kind of intersect a bit. Is wind developers now have to accommodate, have to. I mean, there's more incentive for wind developers to, maybe curtail or do things to reduce bat fatalities so that they don't, kill the endangered species that are being killed by white nose. So I hope does that help?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Okay, now I open this floor to questions from the general audience. Well, questions for Don?
I see a
Yeah.
hand raised. Joe?
Go ahead, Joe. Joe, you there?
I had to unmute. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
We can hear you.
Okay. Thank you very much. One of the things I've worked with white noise a little bit, and I've worked with some acoustics. I'm just curious to know if there has been any investigation or the possibility of an investigation of using bat frequencies to produce a sort of a solid that would appear to be a solid surface to the bats that are approaching a moving wind turbine. I realize this may involve trying to discern what the bats get in returns from solid objects, and then trying to produce a transmitter that would transmit those frequencies from, say, the nacelle on a wind turbine, so that the bats would see the rotating blades as a solid surface. It's
Right. No.
putting up a screen, an acoustic screen. So that's my question and suggestion at the same time.
Yeah, no, that's good stuff. What I'll say is I've wanted to, and a few people have wanted to play around with this idea too, is by texturing the blades. Right now they know the blade is there. They may not know it's moving, but by texturing the blades, that uneven surface and uneven sounds coming back to the bat may, either at least let it know that something's moving, or that it should probably be cautious or something, that like, oh, this is a very cluttered area up ahead. We should, maybe not fly as fast and recklessly.
Either that, or it may look like a stealth surface that's not reflecting enough of their energy for them to see it.
Well, there's that too. I mean, that's another way you could take it. Actually, some moths, Joe, I love this. A lot of moths have a lot of scales on them, and they're kind of almost dusty. Like if you were to take a moth and slap it on the surface, you just all these scales would pop off. What they've learned is those scales are actually, for a lot of moth species, those are sound dampening structures, so that bat echolocation, when it bounces off of them, it's muffled and doesn't quite get back to the bat as quick as quick. Yeah, they may not be able to make much sense out of the echoes from that.
It's a stealth surface. It is a stealth surface. Just that's what a radar stealth aircraft surface looks like, or does.
Yeah.
Not doesn't look like that, but it does that same effect. Right,
yeah. So that the issue with texturing turbines is that that's when the wind engineers get really nervous, because that's you start messing with messing with the blades, and
it'll increase drag probably. They they won't like that.
Yeah, no, they don't like it at all, which is why that's unfortunately nothing's ever gone anywhere with that. I also one other thing on the subject of frequencies is a guy named Jesse Barber. He's this professor at Boise State University in Idaho. And his expertise is bioacoustics and bats. And that same Department of Energy grant that we had to test our ultraviolet deterrent, he was using that money to explore a very low frequency deterrent. Because what we know about bats, when they're flying around like areas like with rushing water, you don't get many bats in areas where you have rushing water or turbulent water. And that's because of the sound. It's low stuff we can hear, but it's still kind of a white noise-ish sound that disrupts their echolocation. And so right now, the ultrasonic deterrents on these turbines, they're weakening too quickly. That high-pitched sound is not going out far enough to even reach bats. But if you use a lower frequency sound, like rushing water or rustling tree leaves or something, that might project further and might create a zone around the turbine that bats are just like, oh, I don't want to bother flying or foraging here.
Sounds like a worthwhile strategy to explore.
Yeah. No, I was pretty excited. His funding has also been kind of shut down for the foreseeable future, unfortunately. But I think that'd be a good line of inquiry to look into.
Is there any? Can you provide some contact information for Jesse?
Yeah, I can do that after the call. We've actually had him come and talk to our EPRI members too before. He's a really good presenter, and he's kind of a big wig in his field. So he's a good person to know. But yeah, absolutely.
Thanks.
Yes, I think time for one last question. Hearing none, thanks a lot, Don. It's wonderful. You've kept us engrossed, and we're almost 2 minutes before showtime. It ends. But thank you again for your presentation, and we look forward to seeing you soon. The next talk, the next seminar will be by Jasper Chumba on managing customer-sided resources at the grid edge. The remaining talks will be presented by alumni of ESE. Jasper was at Pico, and now he's with a consulting company. So we'd be glad to entertain our alumni for the remainder of the semester. Well, thank you all, and see you in a couple of weeks. October 6th, to be precise, is the next seminar. Thank you, Don, and thank you all.
Yeah, thanks everyone for your attention. Have a great rest of your week.